Hello, my name is Suzanne and I'm the founder of Discover Change, and we're all about sharing tips and strategies and inspiration that can help to make a positive difference. And today I'm here with Marcus Belben. Really excited to see you, Marcus. Hello.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. We'll be discussing actually working with the community, including also some important tips for promoting and running community activities. So I know, having collaborated with Marcus, you have extensive experience in organizing and running community groups and activities. And I'd actually like to ask you to share some of your experience and also maybe just some other useful tips with maybe some other volunteers and community leaders who are out there wanting to make a difference and run some of these groups. So thanks again for being here today. So maybe you could just start off with, because I know that you do a lot of different things, you've been involved in a lot of different projects. Maybe just in general, like what is it that you actually do and what is your experience in running community groups and activities?
Well, I suppose a lot of the work I've done has started from being a volunteer or some sort of connection with a particular issue or thing. So, for example, bringing up children has put me into contact with schools and stay and play groups and other things like that. And I suppose in my professional life, there's a lot of overlap between the two. I guess I would summarize by saying I sort of work creatively to learn and connect people. And that can be in any number of different settings and environments, either as sometimes as a volunteer, a leader, or participant, or any number of different ways.
Okay, great. And what types of activities exactly? Yeah, carry on.
Okay, well, for example, seeing as I mentioned schools, after school clubs is something that I have been involved in both as a paid person going in supporting, but also starting from scratch. So the Save Our Schools campaign, shout out for them. We started an after school club at our Kingsheath primary school when there was a cut to Friday afternoons. And it was a way of a positive response really, and engaging with the children to understand why it might be important that they are better off in school in a Friday afternoon than they might be at home. Which, I think that's a good example of a need there, I suppose, in terms of an issue that I thought was very important, a group of people that I was already well connected with, the parents that also thought it was important, and something positive that we could do to make a difference. So I've also worked in a range of intergenerational projects. I've done a lot of life story work. I've set up a community arts group that was just literally about that, connecting schools and old people's homes. Again, recognising a need that people like talking about themselves, and it's a really important thing, and people can feel quite isolated, particularly in care homes. And that contact with children is really very important. And in fact, the children gained a great deal from it too. And there was a whole range of different smaller projects that kind of spun off from that project. Residence groups. So well, actually, it was started, I suppose, when my 6-year-old boy on his birthday was actually knocked over on his bike on his birthday with a brand new bike. Okay. And I guess I was already thinking around how dangerous the road outside our house was, and other issues around road safety. But and he's fine, by the way. In case anyone's worried, he is absolutely fine. He's very, very lucky.
Good.
It set me off on a route of campaigning. Well, we extended 20 mile an hour route to outside our house, which was a big success. Some road improvements along our street, quite extensive ones, to prevent people parking on the pavements and to make the road slower. And partnership work with the local school, Swansea School, and in fact the pub as well, Billesley Pub, all getting together to deal with issues. On our road, it was speeding cars and actually parking outside the school, mostly by parents, that obviously the residents weren't very happy with. But actually what we recognised by getting people together was that well, to start contact between the school and the residents. And in fact, some of the residents have since gone in and run workshops as part of what we do. And we've had a project creating a public sculpture on the roundabouts and a community garden space. So a whole range of things like that. Woodcraft folk, I'd like to, I feel like I'm mentioning, but I think it's really important. This is one of the things about doing community work. You have to acknowledge the importance of people or organisations that you're working with. Absolutely. So woodcraft folk is something that I've been involved in since my children started, and that's about getting children outdoors, working together. The big logo is Span the World with Friendship. I'm now the coordinator for woodcraft folk, so I'm trying to support other groups getting started in other areas. So it's something I obviously feel quite strongly about. Heritage Co-op, I suppose, is also worth mentioning, definitely. I was a founder member of that, and this is to do with the life story work where it started with. But then that link to, it's really important for people to, a lot of people in our society aren't heard effectively. And that's for all sorts of reasons. And I think People's Heritage Co-op is very much about empowering people so they can speak up about whatever issue, whatever thing it is. And certainly a lot of the time it's connected to life stories and history and all those sorts of issues that are really important to us. I think a lot of these, I'm sure that, I'm sorry if I've missed off anyone, by the way, if anyone's watching from an organisation.
I think you could probably, you've been doing so many things, haven't you, as well? And I think it's kind of, I can see that you've got great passion for the community and for people's well-being and bringing people together. So has that always been the case, or do you feel like through the projects you've developed more and more passion towards doing such a thing?
I think yes. I think experience of success and failing in terms of engaging and getting things done effectively is I suppose what's led me down this path, where I've seen that you know, I am very passionate about social justice. You know, I do think it's really important. People need to be heard, not just for their own benefit, for all of our benefits. You know, we need to be listening to people. So yes, I do feel strongly about those things. And I guess both my professional, I haven't actually mentioned the Active Wellbeing Society and Active Communities, which is my paid work, where there is obviously a lot of overlap with the other groups that I'm working with too, in terms of networking, at least. Absolutely.
And what sort of responsibilities do you have in your role for Active Wellbeing Society? What sort of projects have you been involved in, and what is it that you actually do in there?
Well, this last year, there's been a lot of changes, and that has very much affected what I've done in some ways. In other ways, I am in many ways just carrying on doing what I'm doing, because it's just a change of what those needs in communities are. So initially, back in March, I was moved off from my role supporting people to develop spaces outdoors for whatever they want to do, be that gardening or play or whatever, onto food, getting people fed and getting supplies out to people, which was hugely important in the early parts of the pandemic, and in fact I think continues to be, and is something that despite the end of this period, the poverty hasn't, and in fact I think it's probably worse. So there are a lot of people there who still need a lot of support in order to, I think, basic needs, but also to be heard as well, and to empower them to take action for themselves.
Well, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right, and it's great to hear what type of work you're doing. And I bet that doing a lot of the community work as a volunteer helped you to get the paid work as then to progress in that area and actually do something that you're truly passionate about. I know you had a slightly different background and then actually developed this community approach, and now have been holding clearly many different types of positions. So it's great what you're doing, but sometimes it's actually complicated for some of these people, the end users, to actually access some of these services because of lack of awareness, isn't it? And actually what we really want to do is try and actually increase awareness within the community that these services actually exist. And you've clearly connected with so many different types of groups and communities. So I'd love to hear maybe what types of skills are needed? I mean, there's a variety of skills needed, but what do you think are important in terms of how you approach people and how you run these projects in the first place?
Well, I think where it gets hardest, I suppose, is where there's a conflict of opinion, and where you're working with people who might take the exact opposite view to what you think is the logical thing to do. And it's really important to, well, first of all, stay calm and listen to what people are saying, and to try and find some common ground and to understand why people are feeling the way they are feeling. In our area, recently, the low traffic neighbourhoods has been challenging for, well, it's polarised communities, I would say, which is it's a good example of where I think only now, I feel like it's starting to, I think a common ground is starting to be found around public transport and transport more generally, and how can we make sure that, because everyone wants safe, quiet roads, everyone wants to be able to get to where they need to get as quickly as possible. How can we achieve that? Low traffic neighbourhoods, well, I can understand where people are coming from when they say it slows them getting to places in their cars. And that's a difficult message to communicate, and then to listen to why people are responding in the way they are, and then finding those solutions on a really very tight budget and timescale, because people need to see change as well. I think I'm a big believer in action learning, I suppose it was called at some point, I don't know, but about listening to what people are saying, learning, and then acting on that, and then reviewing, and then going back and listening and learning again. So small steps, I suppose, but always thinking about how your previous step has worked or not worked, or how effective it's been.
Absolutely. And
that can be formal. Sorry, that can be a formal process, or it can be something that you can be aware of in your own head, depending on what works well for you, or whether you need to communicate it across to people.
Well, absolutely. And I think even with despite sometimes our best efforts, it's not always easy to communicate some of our intentions and what we want to do, especially when it comes to running community groups and doing big changes and actually pulling those through. So I can imagine, like you said, communication, listening to people is absolutely crucial. But then also, I guess what you're doing is kind of like the communication in terms of presentation to others, because you've ran a lot of these groups and ran some of these projects, and actually it's so important to put that message across, right, would you say?
Yes, and I think this is getting back to creativity, what I think of as being creative. Sometimes you can, let's say, be in a discussion with someone, and you know that there's a clash, and it seems to be completely unresolvable. I think there are creative ways to first of all plan to avoid that as best as possible, and also find. And I think it's always good to have different hooks into a conversation, to find different ways of approaching it that might bring about a different resolution or solution, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, 100%. And I can hear that you're definitely very passionate about bringing people together and driving these community causes. I've seen a lot of the resources that you've created, and you've really worked with a lot of different types of organizations as well. So what would you say that you're actually passionate about? Is there an easy way to say what your passion is?
Well, it is about connecting people for common good, effectively, and that's well, to give an example, I suppose what I think of as one of the successes, Pagnell Primary School, a school in Weedy Castle, which I did some work on to promote creativity in the classroom. And actually, through that work, I suppose we identified that one of the big problems was community engagement, and that wasn't something that was on the curriculum. And likewise, with the children, there's a real problem. There were no free activities after school. The after-school clubs didn't provide anything free. So we started a Pagnell After School Club. We started Cat's Eyes, which is like a group that was going around celebrating achievements in the school. And we started to involve in the children. There was a core group of children who are young archivists, who are effectively news reporters as well, who went around and documented these things. And actually, within a relatively short amount, about a year or so, we were successful with an HLF application for a significant chunk of money. Fantastic. To create the first and still the only repository archive in a state primary school in Weedy Castle. Wow. In the UK. So that was a real achievement. And in fact, the school itself, I think the support within the school was absolutely crucial for that to happen. Not just from senior leadership, not just from teachers, from parents, from children, from everyone in the community. And the school was so committed to it, they actually took a week off curriculum to launch the event. And where we ran a whole load of activities funded by HLF. Thank you very much, HLF. And that was in 2013.
Wow.
And now I'm going to be well, it's just been delayed actually, which is frustrating because of the restrictions we're still under for a little while longer. A celebration, an Ofsted celebration at the school, and we'll be restarting again in September, the After School Club.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. And I bet everything started from an idea, and everything started from this is wrong, something needs to happen, something needs to change, and actually pulling through all of the efforts and what you did and what you achieved, and now what the school has achieved as a consequence of all of that effort. That's really admirable, because it shows that it takes time and effort. It takes a huge amount of commitment, but to actually be in that position, and the only school as well to have that position, or have the application approved, that's fantastic news. I was actually just about to ask you what has been your greatest success, so I guess this might be one of them. Is there any other great success that you might want to share?
Well, certainly. I think as well, it's important to, in terms of what success is, there were lots of spin-offs that came from that, that connected with directly or indirectly. I mean, from 2014 to 2018, we had a whole series of school visits to Lodge Hill Cemetery, which is a cemetery down the road. And I think when we first proposed it, people thought, what's he talking about, taking children into a cemetery to visit war graves? But actually, with the support of that school, and then a number of schools, all around secondary schools and primary schools, came to visit and document the stories of the people who were buried there during World War I and World War II. And that's an important piece of research now that's part of People's Heritage Co-op. Some of it's on, I think all of it's online probably.
That's brilliant.
I would say Active Streets I'm proud of as well, and that came from playing out. And I suppose that was linked. This is where these things they all sort of link together, and not just as a network, but also in terms of, I think social capital is really important to not just, you do have to keep a clear focus on what your purpose is and what you're doing, but I think it's also equally important to make sure, and the two things aren't exclusive, I think they can both happen, they should both happen. Support other people like-minded who are achieving maybe the same objectives by very different means. So playing out, getting children out on the streets, literally outside their houses. There was a real need for people, I think there still is, for, in the past, I used to play on the streets, I used to bike God knows how many miles away from the house when I was very little, and people can't do that anymore. And I think the generation of parents were looking back and thinking, well, we really miss, and we want our children to have that opportunity. So there were a few streets in Kings Heath that started initially on play days. We closed 3 streets to start with, I think, on a play day, supported by Parks for Play and the library service. Was really helpful to have Parks for Play, well, both of them, in terms of providing activities which, we as a group of parents had less confidence at that particular time to do out in a street. And Parks for Play certainly were experienced at that. And then that's developed, I think, over time. It's doubled literally every year for I don't know how many years. It's taken on by the City Council and has become what is Active Streets, which is part of the Active Wellbeing Society.
That's fantastic. I love how everything is a bit of a has a knock-on effect on another one, and then actually you open another one and keep finding needs. And that's great that and that you have that continuous commitment to be pursuing these causes. I think it's great. So thanks on behalf of everyone for sure. And obviously I can imagine that obviously it has taken a whole team, it has taken a whole community to make this happen. And you mentioned now a few times as well how important partnerships are, isn't it? And collaborating with the local community, mentioned library. So how would you develop these relationships? Because especially now when we consider, you know, other volunteers, other community leaders who are out here to make a difference and want to do something, want to engage with the community, but sometimes it's a bit hard to get started. So one of the things that you mentioned, definitely partnerships. So how should we approach them to develop these relationships?
Well, very often those things are already there, you know, that you may not be aware of, that just require a bit of time and energy and thought to go out there, meet people. For a lot of activities that we talked about is literally about knocking on your next door neighbour's door. And it might be about, I mean, we've on our street, we're doing, this is the second year running, this was an idea from a house a few houses down to do a sunflower growing competition. So we've all got, this year, again, the same, we've got sunflowers outside our front doors. And it's a great way it's a good example of an activity that you might think, well, how's that achieving bringing a community together? If that's, you know, it's an indirect way to build those relationships that might turn into something else. Because I am close to my neighbours, I'm in a position to be able to open up other conversations easily, because there's that trust built. It makes a big difference to any community venture. And having fun, I think, actually, as well, is the other thing. I really enjoy this sort of thing. I really do love doing this sort of the work I do, which is why I do it voluntarily and you know, as a job. I think you can't see voluntary work as a chore or an extra thing that you've got to get done. It's sometimes to achieve objectives you do have to knuckle down, and I mean, funding applications personally I don't particularly enjoy. I don't know many people who do. Maybe there's someone out there who does, I don't know, but it's something that you have to do because of the end objective. But I think you've always got to keep in sight that what you're doing is because you love it and you enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, 100%. And I think that's the best part, to also get people on your side, get the community, and leading by example is by far the most important thing. And if you're committed and focused on that course, then other people will naturally start to follow, for sure. Like you said, connecting with like-minded people is so important. So we've talked about a couple of great successes that you've had. What about some challenges? You know, has there been a particular challenge maybe that you faced working in a community or in a particular project? Because sometimes when we hear from others, you know, that they've struggled with something, and maybe how did you then overcome it, would be great and useful, obviously, to someone who might be facing similar problems.
Well, sometimes you don't, because, and there may be very good reasons why an idea starts off and you think, that's a fantastic idea, I want to do this. And there's not the support for it, or there's not, for whatever reasons, it might be something you might have to shelve. There might be another time for it to come back to. It may not be that the idea is a bad idea. It may just be the wrong time for the people you're working with, or any number of other reasons. But I still think, you know, you need to learn from that and try again and think about a new way of approaching the problem. Keep to your overall objective and think about how you might do that. It's fairly typical when a street closure happens for whatever reason. I've talked about this before, haven't I? But anyway, as an example, if you're just closing a street to play outside on, it's really important to knock on everyone's door and to see how they feel about it. And almost certainly someone will be cautious, at least to start with. You know, I think it's not hard to win people over if you listen to what they're saying and what their objection is and try and find a way around it. So I feel like it's about empathy more than anything else, and finding a meeting point where you recognise and value what that person is saying to you and why they're saying it. and are able to sometimes be mindful, I suppose, in terms of putting your emotions slightly to one side, because sometimes your instant reaction is, oh, that person's so annoying, or whatever that you know the response is, and just try and focus on what they're saying and how you might find common ground to make a difference.
Well, absolutely. And I guess that comes also with experience, having gone through so many and having worked with so many different organizations and individuals and groups yourself. I bet it's also a bit of a learning journey. So sometimes and me personally, when I said I wanted to do certain volunteer jobs, and we have an idea of how it will be or what I'm going to be doing, and actually the realistic side of it probably isn't always like that. It actually takes a huge amount of effort sometimes to make certain things happen, but the reward is great. Just like you said, you know, it's actually so important that when you come to these kinds of roles and responsibilities, it's not about the paycheck. Well, of course that is also important, but actually it's something that comes from the heart and that you're really committed to.
And I think particularly if you try and bury or pretend a problem isn't happening, it can potentially make things a lot worse. So if there is someone on your street who doesn't want you to have a street party and you go ahead anyway, you know, it could be, you know, the consequence of that, of actually, well, you're not basically achieving your objective, then you're actually going to be being divisive in your community rather than bringing people together, potentially.
Absolutely. And taking on board and finding those compromises that then suit. Sometimes can be hard to find that suits everyone, but for sure working on that and taking on the feedback that is being provided. So that's very good. And actually, on that note, then maybe if you could give a couple of final tips on raising awareness of community projects. I know you've mentioned a couple of times about knocking on people's doors and chatting with your neighbors and obviously visiting maybe some of those local places. However, when it goes to the next level, when you're organizing activities and something a little bit more, maybe that has those specific objectives, working with Active Wellbeing Society, what types of methods have you used to really get people to join and to, because it's one thing is, you know, talking to people, but another thing is actually getting them committed, coming to the events or to the to what you're organizing. So any tips for maybe other volunteers and community leaders on how to raise awareness of those things?
Well, sometimes you might have to take smaller steps to bring people to an event or an activity that you want to see happening. And I think as well, sometimes, let's say if you're focusing on a particular space where you want the activity to happen, you have to sometimes think a bit broader in terms of what the activity you're going to do. You might have to walk a bit beyond that to talk to people a little bit further out, and support activities that are happening, you know, further afield, in order to hook people in and to build that social capital effectively. So they start to listen to you and start to think, oh, I would actually quite like to come along, and that sounds like quite a nice idea. I know that person. He's nice. I'll come along and sell some fairy cakes or whatever it is they want to do. You know, you know. So I don't want to be too prescriptive, because very often those solutions are something you only find by having those conversations or by responding to someone asking you for something, and how that builds. There are professional people around, and a whole range of charities and other people who will do things for free as well. Sometimes that you have to consider or balance. Are you still achieving your means by inviting Coca-Cola along to a fresh fruit and vegetable promotion? You know, the answer might be yes. I'm not going to cause any judgment on that, but you have to consider these things and how people might respond. The people that are also involved in the group. Absolutely.
So staying very consistent with the message, maybe especially what you're saying there is connecting with the right partners, right local organizations. And like you said, there is actually a huge amount of resources and support and activities already being arranged for people. So actually maybe visiting the centers where the customers already are or potential target audience and having those discussions there. And I guess what you've said many times actually, and this is such a crucial thing. And I think one of the key things to take away from today is to really listen and not have any bias or prejudice about what should happen or what this person should or shouldn't say, but actually being very open and flexible and committed to your cause. So would you add to that anything else? Any final tips to volunteers or other community leaders who are like, you know, I'm ready to take on, I'm not quite sure if as many projects as you have, Marcus, but at least some new challenge ahead.
Well, I think you summarised very well. First of all, thanks very much. That was absolutely spot on. I'm not sure what I could add to that, but you know, keep your passion, keep your determination, but be prepared to be open and flexible to how you achieve that. Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty much it. And sometimes we say grand things, but actually it's really about the daily activities and that daily commitment, taking and having those important conversations and being committed to a cause. And I think you're definitely an example of that, of how many opportunities not only has it brought to you in terms of career progress and moving from volunteering to actually paid work as well, but also because of that, other people have been able to benefit. You know, you've had that effect and organized these things. So it's just an inspiration. Definitely, you are definitely an inspiration to other volunteers and community leaders who want to do that as well. So thank you again very much for doing all of that, and thank you for taking part. Really good to hear about your journey and what you do. So thanks again, Marcus, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.